Hello, and welcome to Decarbonize, the clean energy podcast from Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota nonprofit working to speed our state's transition to a clean energy economy. My name is Joe Olson. I do communications here at Fresh Energy, and I'm here today to share with you a recording of the third webinar in our Intersection of Energy and Community four-part series. In this discussion, Fresh Energy's Janice Watts, Senior Associate on the Energy Access and Equity team, is joined by Russ Stark, Chief Resilience Officer for the City of St. Paul, and Audrey Arkin, Youth Member of St. Paul's Climate Justice Advisory Board, to discuss authentic community engagement and specifically the difference between public input and a co-created climate vision. And with that, let's begin.
All right, so welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today for part 3 of Fresh Energy's Intersection of Energy and Community webinar series. So we've been doing these webinars through the month of July, and this is part 3. I am Janice Watts. I am she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior associate here at Fresh Energy on our Energy Access and Equity team. Fresh Energy is a Minnesota-based nonprofit working towards a vision of a just, prosperous, and resilient future, powered by a shared commitment to a carbon neutral economy. So today we're going to have a conversation about authentic community engagement. So over the next hour, I'm joined by two awesome people that I admire and respect so much. So we're going to have a discussion about the difference between public input and a co-created climate vision, drawing from the three of us, our experience forming and being part of the City of St. Paul's new Climate Justice Advisory Board, which we affectionately call CJAB. So this is something that we think is one of the first in the country, and certainly is a model that many other cities are watching closely. So it's going to be fun to talk about today. The focus of the board, which was formed in 2020, is to align St. Paul's climate action work from the Climate Action Resiliency Plan. And so to align this work with the needs and interests of the communities that are facing climate change, like the brunt of climate change the most, mostly BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, and under-resourced communities. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So I think it's going to be a great conversation. Before we get started, do some housekeeping and thank our promotional partners for the webinar series. So shout out to our sponsors and partners who help spread the word about this event. So thank you to the AIA, CERTS, Climate Generation, Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition, Minnesota Electrical Association, MNCEA, Pollen, RMI, Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, and WSB. So thanks to you all for spreading the word. All right, and with that, we're going to meet our awesome panel. So I'm joined today by Audrey Arkin, member and youth leader of the St. Paul Climate Justice Board. So Audrey is a member with me, and Russ Stark, Chief Resiliency Officer for the City of St. Paul. And I will be wearing, just a note, I'll be wearing two hats today. So one is moderator, and of course, staff at Fresh Energy, and the other as co-chair of the Climate Justice Advisory Board. And so Audrey, Russ, and I, and the members of the Climate Justice Advisory Board have been working together over the past year. And this is going to be one of our first times getting to share and reflect with an audience about our experiences. So hello, Audrey and Russ, how are you doing? Thanks for being here.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. So yeah, so we hope that you all listening to the webinar and the podcast soon will leave here with a better understanding of what's possible in terms of local community progress on climate and what it really means to have a co-created process and actionable steps towards local engagement in climate planning, which of course we all have to play a role in because it's happening right now. So we're going to start out with a panel discussion, and then we'll move to Q&A for the last 15 minutes. Many of you submitted questions in advance, but if you didn't, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Not the chat, use the Q&A so we see it, and to send in your question. All right, so let's dive right in. We start with you, Russ, to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your work at the City of St. Paul. And on the board.
All right. Thanks, Janice. Well, again, great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm Russ Stark. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of St. Paul, working in Mayor Carter's office. I've been in this role for about 3.5 years now, and the mayor really has me in this role focused on climate and sustainability across the city's work. There are CROs out there who have other areas of focus as well, but mine is really quite focused on climate and sustainability. And one of those duties is now to help staff the Climate Justice Advisory Board. So pleasure to be here and look forward to launching deeper into this conversation.
Wonderful, thank you. And Audrey, what you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Audrey Arquin. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently about to become a senior at Central High School in St. Paul. Any St. Paulites out there?
Yeah.
And I sort of have to do a lot surrounding sort of environmental justice, both in the worlds of policy and activism. I got my start through an organization called the Minnesota Youth Council that does a lot of work uplifting youth voice. And I specifically focus on working on environmental justice policy and sort of seeing how we can get sort of young people more knowledgeable about environmental justice, how we can write good policy impacting young people about environmental justice. Then also with a big youth org called Minnesota Youth for Climate Justice, sort of digging in, looking at how we can impact communities across the city, how we can help young people that are dealing with problems surrounding environmental racism and all the different things that come with the climate crisis and those disproportionate impacts. So it's really awesome to be here.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. It is really such an honor to work with both of you. And yeah, I'm so lucky to get to learn from the both of you and to do this work. So so we are part of the Climate Justice Advisory Board, CJAB. There's about 15 of us on the board. So the CJAB is a kind of one-of-a-kind board, as we're discovering, that is focused on climate justice for the city. And something I wanted to share is that we've been working on a definition of climate justice at the Climate Justice Advisory Board. It's still a working definition, as both of you know, but I wanted to share some pieces that I think that we've been working to really center. And I think we all agree that St. Paul, what can St. Paul look like if it had a just and equitable focus for climate? And so I think that looks and feels like where there's equitable systems that allow for our diverse residents and neighborhoods to participate in decision making, and where we can all thrive in. And so in which the systems of like systemic racism and sexism, environmental racism, economic inequality, these things that have exacerbated climate change, they've really been addressed, and certainly that the system has been rebuilt and reimagined. So I just wanted to put that out there as that's just kind of a way that we're trying to kind of organize ourselves and guide ourselves through this work. So let's start with kind of just talking about what the board, how it's functioned and structured. So Russ, maybe you can kind of fill us in on what the board does and is from your perspective, being a staffer to our board.
Absolutely. So the Climate Justice Advisory Board was created by a resolution of the City Council, and its purpose is really to advise the mayor, the council, and city staff about the best ways for our city programs and policies to reflect this idea of climate justice, and to ensure that our programs in climate and energy, and to some degree in transportation, are benefiting our frontline and most vulnerable populations and communities at least as much as everyone else, if not more so. And so it is a brand new thing, and it's been fun to sort of really co-create that structure with the board after you all have come on. But it's really also meant to establish more of a two-way conversation between the city and the community at large around these issues, as opposed to sort of the occasional outreach around a particular topic. It's really meant to be that ongoing place where we are engaging around these critical issues.
Yes, yeah, and that's what's interesting is the way that it's like, as we're going to talk about how the board became kind of an output of community engagement and will hopefully serve and function as a model for community engagement as well. To talk about kind of where the idea of the board came from, I can attest to being a part of that. Russ and I, we had meetings together, not just the two of us, but as part of the community engagement process for kind of introducing the climate action plan, the climate action and resiliency plan for the city. We had put together some meetings with environmental justice advocates, and it was within those meetings that this idea of the board came from. And I'm just like, was so amazed to, be able to see the progress of that being an idea that came from community members of St. Paul. And now here we are in its like actualized form, which is very, very cool. So yeah, if there's things that you want to share about that experience too, Russ, just as, because I'm sure all that groundwork from getting it from the idea and for all of us advocates saying like, yeah, the city should do this, like, go do it. You had to actually be there behind the scenes putting it together to make it real to the resolution form.
Absolutely. It was, so we spent about 9 months in total engaging the community in what started out as a first draft of the climate action resilience plan, and then went through multiple iterations of the plan after that feedback started coming in. And one of the consistent themes that we heard, and especially at that environmental justice advocates table that you helped organize, Denise, but really even more broadly at some of the community engagement sessions that we had, was we, as community members, what we heard a lot of, we really care about this topic. We want to know how to stay engaged and involved in the city's work, not just when you're developing a plan every so often, but actually around kind of the month to month and year to year work of advancing climate action in a just and equitable way in St. Paul. And so how can we do that? And so the suggestion of the board, I thought, was a really great first step. And I emphasize that this is really just the first step in kind of building out an infrastructure of engagement around climate justice in the city, so that we have a group of the 16 of you who are now our sort of first line of communication out to the community about our ideas that are sort of emanating from the city about how to address the climate crisis with programs and policy. But it will equally, I hope, work in the other direction as well. You all bringing ideas to the table, helping us prioritize those actions, helping to really shape policy and program in a way that's going to be beneficial for our communities and for the city overall. And I think, climate work is so tricky because like a lot of work, because it's so urgent that we take action and take action quickly. But if we just rush and try to do things without really talking to people about how some of those things might include them, affect them, we're going to get it wrong. And we're going to get it wrong sometimes anyway. But I think we can feel a lot more confident with the CJAB in place and with some broader community engagement that we can do on top of that, that when we do come to the adopting a new policy or really setting on a new path, that we've really thought through some of the implications and costs and benefits in a way that's going to benefit our whole community.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So yeah, so Audrey, in hearing the things that Russ is bringing out there, you joined the board as one of our 3 youth members, something that I speak for myself. I know that was super important that we were including young people's voices, especially because, and this is climate justice work, environmental justice work, clearly is going to affect all of us, but of course it's going to affect young people even more, because this is your future. This is all of our present as well, but it's also your future. So we needed to make sure we have youth voices on the board. But you are a busy person. You're like everywhere doing all sorts of things. What made you want to join the board, and how is it going for you?
Yeah, I will not lie. There's never enough time in the day. But as I said earlier, thinking about sort of the areas in which I was doing work before I joined CJAB, policy work at a state level, and then also diving deep into communities, into these small groups, whether it be a school community like we've done at Central many times, or whether it's small neighborhood communities. Really the intersection of that is CJAB. It's this idea of how do we create policy in a wide manner surrounding an issue like the climate crisis, like environmental justice, and how do we do that for communities inside St. Paul? So once I sort of got that in my head, once I sort of figured out this really obvious now in my head intersection, it was almost a no-brainer on those things. And sort of this idea of like, how do we combine the role of activism and how do we combine the role of community discussion and communities, and sort of this idea of like the unofficial things that we do in order to help others, this sort of all these different things, and how do we combine that with the institutional policy making has always been really interesting to me. And I think, well, no one has perfected sort of coming up with that connection. I do think that there's opportunities inside the Climate Justice Advisory Board to sort of accomplish those goals. And the other thing is that knowing that there was youth member spots was really important to me. Because I think, number one, as you said, Janice, the climate crisis and climate justice is an issue that is uniquely impacting young people. And we think about the effects of climate change now, we know they're going to get worse in the future, and we know it's going to be our generation that sort of is the ones that are bearing the brunt of those impacts. And we also know inside St. Paul, there's all these problems with widening disparities between students of color and white students, disparities between low income students, things that have not been helped by the last year and the impacts of the pandemic.
Yes.
All those things are so important when we talk about environmental justice. As a young person, as a person that goes to school with so many different people in a community like St. Paul Public Schools, all those things I think made it so important for me to be a part of CJAB.
Thank you. I really, really love that you're drawing out that this is like this connection of activism and policy, and looking at how do we bring activism into these like more institutionalized spaces, because that's what it's going to take. So it's going to take, and I fully resonate with that and connect with that, and even just knowing that there's challenges in the education system, especially when it comes to teaching about climate change and climate crisis, right? Like we are past that point that this is a crisis, this is an emergency, and so how are we going to engage and actually we'll listen and learn from young people and understand that this is, you said, uniquely impacting youth. So is this what you, so far, I mean, I should mention, we've only been meeting since February. We were formed in 2020, like, again, the resolution, but, it took time for all of us to submit applications and to have the conversations about what this is going to look like. So we've only been kind of functioning since February. But so far, is this what you anticipated? Are there things that surprised you, or that you're looking forward to? I can pose that to both of you, but Audrey first, if there's anything there.
Yeah, I think it's always difficult going into new places, and especially going into sort of these places that are being formed as you're a part of it. And there's both exciting things about that, and there's both things that come at you and you're like, where did that come from? I did not expect to be working on things like this. But I do think, sort of in my perspective through these first 5 or 6 months, really for me, the one thing that has been really obvious has been that the group of people we have do have the capability of sort of like discovering these new things, of working towards the issues, going back to what I said about the combination of activism and policy. I do feel like the people we have sort of the ability to do that. And that's been really impressive. And that's been something I really wished we had. And I think that's something that we're going in the direction of. The other thing that I think has been really important, which is something that I anticipated, but every time it's always very interesting, is this idea of institutionalized youth voice. And when it comes to that, it's so much of a mixed bag in so many spaces to figure out groups that include young people. What is the role of young people actually? And it's not just in climate spaces, it's not just in policymaking spaces, it's in so many spaces where we're at the point where people are now starting to include young people more, which is really important. But we now see that there's all these different things that like how we are included is a really important thing. And I think that's one thing that I've noticed. I think we've done a really good job of sort of using young people in a way that benefits them and also benefits other young people in their communities, which is the most important part of including young people in these positions. And that's something that I want to continue to think about is like, how do we institutionalize youth voice here and across different organizations in better ways? But those are the two things that have really stood out to me for the first 5 or 6 months.
Nice. Yeah, that leadership development piece is, I think, like of utmost importance. It's what good is it to say, oh, we've got youth members on this board or this ad hoc committee, what have you, and then to like not actually give you space to grow and to learn and to contribute meaningfully, both for your own leadership development, but kind of for the good of society. I think we all need to be paying a lot more attention to what young people have to say. And I know I look young, but I've been in your position of being like, I feel that feeling of tokenization as a young person is not a great feeling, and everyone needs to stop doing it. So let's give you all the space and the platform to share your ideas. Thank you. Russ, is there anything you'd like to respond in terms of things you've anticipated or anything that surprised you? Or you're on mute.
Sorry about that, having a mute issue. I just wanted to comment briefly about the youth voice issue as well. This was the first, so the City of St. Paul does have a youth commission that's on an all youth board, but this is the first other advisory board where we intentionally included youth seats, and there's now a movement afoot among the mayor's administration to start adding youth seats to all of our boards. I think credit the youth for being so engaged in climate in particular, that it almost seemed obvious and clear that we needed to have youth seats on this board from the beginning. And so we do have at least 2 seats laid out in the city council resolution for youth. We ended up with 3 because we had 3 just fantastic applicants. And in the process of developing the structure of the CJAB before you all came on, there was a real balancing act of like wanting to have some structure, but also wanting you all to be able to come in and sort of make your own mark on how the board functions. And so I see some questions coming in about sort of policies and programs that we've maybe already worked on. And really, we're just in the infancy of getting to that place because we've spent some time finalizing our internal structure and process. We also have I would say, a diverse group in a lot of ways, age-wise, racial and ethnic makeup, gender, and also the degree of sort of expertise and background in climate and policy work. And so I think there's also an element of all of us needing to sort of share information, hear about existing programs, and then also hear about some of the new program proposals that are on the drawing board to get a common language and a common understanding to be able to kind of help inform what's best moving forward. So I personally, the board has met and exceeded my expectations, and it's as I've shared with all of you, it is actually a sort of a new body of work for me, and it's time not spent on other things, but it's been frankly some of the best time that I've spent in the last 6 months in terms of just thinking differently about the work and moving the work forward. So
awesome, thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue that goes to our next question. We're going to talk a little bit about the structure of how we have organized ourselves. So, as we're saying, this is a brand new committee. So we were kind of tasked with creating the structure for ourselves and really building it from the ground up, which of course presented its own challenges. But I think most folks on the board would agree that we really wanted this to be something that was reflective of how we think about climate justice, particularly, and community engagement in the ways that we setting ourselves up for a good way to do that. So we just designed our leadership structure to have co-chairs. So like I said, I'm co-chair of the board. Melissa Wenzel, shout out Melissa, is our other co-chair. We have a secretary, his name is Nick Martin. So shout out to Nick as well. And then Audrey, of course, you are our youth leader, or youth chair. I can say that you chair the youth leader position that makes up our kind of executive committee team. But we really wanted to make sure that all of the board members, I mean, we're all busy people. I think most people who like join boards and things do it because they care about their community, care about their city. But we also wanted to make sure that we are being conscientious of people's time and capacity. But let's talk a little bit about the process of how we kind of came to this idea of our leadership structure. Maybe to start with you, Russ, how did that feel and that process look to you as, of course, again, the staffer to this board, and knowing that there are other commissions and boards at the city level. But here we are trying to do things just a tad bit differently.
Yeah, well, I think it's a different sort of a board than we've had before at the city in a lot of ways. And so in terms of staffing, there's myself, there's Carlos from the mayor's office who's helping out with some of the logistics and really kind of helping people kind of make sure they have what they need to participate effectively. And we may be the only board that the city has that is staffed within the mayor's office, honestly. And partly that's because we needed to figure out where the board could be kind of most effective and have the most direct tie into where the work was happening. And in our administration, a lot of the city's work in the space is happening sort of through my leadership. And so it made sense to staff it there. Moving forward, that might there might be reasons to change that structure. It's interesting, within city governments in different places, the work of climate sustainability happens in very different ways. Often there's an office of sustainability or resilience. And we have a more distributed model, I guess, in St. Paul in the way that we do the work. So we've got my position in the mayor's office, but then for the most part, I work with staff who are spread out across city departments doing different functions related to energy and transportation and green infrastructure and things like that. So I think figuring out how to plug the board into all those different pieces is something that is still evolving.
Yeah, definitely. Audrey, I think it's going to respond to you as we try to make sure that this board, that we're striking a balance between establishing roles and responsibilities for it to not feel too hierarchical. That's something that I definitely was like, I don't want this to feel like too prescribed or too top down. Has this been like a different process from other boards and organizations that you're a part of? And of course, in serving in this leadership role as the youth leader, are we being fair to you as one of the three of our youth leaders, asking you to step into this leadership role? How has that felt for you?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed differently as a young person is my perspective on chaos and sort of organizations building themselves on the go is very different than with a lot of older people. It's my forte, I'd say. I'm used to seeing the spaces where you come in and you're having to build yourself up before you can actually do real work, which is sometimes it's hard, and sometimes you get sort of that ability to build everything up and you get to design it the way you want it to be, and that's really exciting. And I think one of the things we talked about being really intentional about is that idea of not having a hierarchical committee, sort of allowing people to have the ability to sort of discuss this idea of climate justice in a space that feels like equal, it feels representative. I know, Russ, you were talking earlier about having a really diverse group of ages, of racial makeup, of also ability and experience. And I think that's really important in this conversation about climate justice. And that's one of the things that I think is really smart about not having a hierarchical model, is because when it comes to an issue like climate justice, oftentimes the people that are being affected most are those with the least capacity, the least served communities. And oftentimes when we don't have those perspectives, because we focus so much on having only people that have worked in such and such sector for 10 years, we miss the really important perspectives that can make and break sort of this topic of climate justice. And I think that gets into the bigger conversation about community engagement, is how do you truly represent a community while also having the ability to do a lot of really good work? And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about, that I know we've been intentional about, and I think it's a really interesting question to think about moving forward.
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, it's and of course, this has been a year, right? Like even stemming from last year, we've all been through a lot. And having, I think just to kind of talk about this like role of this space and why it can be, what being a model of community engagement can also look like is this being a space where we can bring things that we're all experiencing, collectively experiencing, or even individually experiencing out and be able to make those connections to climate justice. So I wanted to tell a quick story about a very particular letter that we wrote to the mayor's office and to city council. So stemming back to when Dante Wright was killed in Brooklyn Center by Brooklyn Center police. For all of us who live in St. Paul may remember that there was a curfew that was imposed in St. Paul in response to the uprisings and reactions that was happening in Brooklyn Center to Dante Wright's killing. And I felt from the get-go, something we, on our very first meeting, we went around kind of saying like what our kind of hopes and aspirations of this board will be. And I remember saying the thing I wanted was for this to be a powerful space, because we're all powerful people. And this is the fight of our times right now, is around the climate crisis, and how all these intersecting crises are happening right before our eyes, right, between the COVID-19 pandemic and so much around racial reckoning that is long overdue. So back to this letter. So after there was the imposing of the curfew, I emailed you all and said, is this something that we, as the Climate Justice Advisory Board, can we say something? Can we do something? I think I came to you all with a lot of feelings of how I was experiencing, seeing what was happening in Brooklyn Center, feeling a sense of needed solidarity. But the curfew, that curfew really, that said, everybody's, get home by 10 p.m. or, whatever it was, like stay off the roads. Obviously, like National Guard was called in. Was reminiscent of the George Floyd uprisings in 2020. And it just made me feel like this, I don't know, personally, if that really felt like the right response. But I came to you all as Climate Justice Advisory Board, to our full board, and asked for us to express our feelings in a letter to Mayor Carter and the City Council. And so I just wanted to, because I think there are some questions, I know that's not a policy, right? But like the very important connection between what's happening with police brutality, systemic racism, climate, the fact that we had National Guard up and down our streets, even in Brooklyn Center, there was a lot of munitions that were being used that was impacting the air quality. I mean, the noise of tanks up and down our streets. All of that felt to me like a clear disruption of our environment. And I just really wanted to be clear that this is also part of climate chaos, and like what happens when people are reacting in a sort of way, and then we get like our institutions reacting back to us. I just really wanted us to think about what that intersection of climate justice and race, police brutality was, and to make a statement. So that kind of came with a lot of questions around, is this our role? Is this something that we can do? That's something that I asked, like, is this something, I was like, hey, Russ, is this something we can do? Is this something that's appropriate? And, I think it came down to be from most of the members felt that it was something that was appropriate. But I think that was a real test of like being able to look at the scope and the role of the board. Yeah, so thank you for the time to share about that. For the two of you, what kind of like reflections or responses did you have from the letter, and just kind of thinking about our overall like role as a board, and certainly in communicating also with the mayor's office and city council? Maybe Russ, to you first, if you want to start.
Yeah, it really made me appreciate how you're starting that conversation about an issue that, as we've discussed at the board, is very related to climate work. was the beginning of, oh, this board is going to want to communicate about things that the city might not have necessarily specifically asked them to communicate about. But that role of advising the mayor and council is at the heart of it. And so you all sort of took the authority given to you as a board to communicate something to the mayor and council, which is exactly what they've asked you to do. And I can share as a follow-up to Janice's story that the board actually requested that the mayor join them at their next meeting, and the mayor came and spent an hour with the board talking about this as a important follow-up conversation, which again, some of the things we're doing are unprecedented, and I don't know that that's happened in other cities, but it feels good to be in one where that can happen, and where the board's letter and position was taken very seriously with a direct kind of response and engagement.
Thank you. Audrey, if you, yeah, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that was really important about that is during that time we were having our discussion about what we wanted our definition for climate justice to be. And I think through that conversation, I felt we didn't really get like a total answer in that idea. And then when Janice came with this letter, it sort of hit this thing that I always sort of envision is this idea of like, what is environmental justice? And most of this is taken from Angela Davis, who gave this incredible definition that I forever will use, which is that environmental justice is literally anything that impacts the environment in the unjust manner. And our environment is everywhere we live, everywhere we work, everywhere we act. And that is policing, that is housing, that is education. It's all related. It's all intersectional in so many ways.
Love that. Yes.
The example that I always use, and I think it connects, is with the Herc incinerator. That's an environmental issue because we're burning trash, which is creating pollution, but then it's a health issue. And that health issue is then an economic issue. And that economic issue then becomes a policing issue, which is also then a housing issue. And I think when we read that letter, when I saw that, I think that entwined with sort of defining our role as a council, I think those two things together made me realize, number one, that there are people that are thinking the same way I am about what we can do as a council, what we can do as a group of people. But also once we were able to send that letter, I think it gave me the chance to say, well, here's a new idea. Here's what we can actually do in sort of impacting all these spaces, impacting all these different communities in a way that's much broader than maybe it was envisioned, but in the end is all still interconnected. It's all still this idea of climate justice, this idea of environmental justice.
Oh, thank you, Audrey, for invoking Angela Davis. That is, obviously she's, if anybody doesn't know, please look her up, please. But what a really important way to define environmental justice. That is an injustice, right? Like anything that impacts the environment in an unjust manner. And that's, yeah, there are myriad of examples of that everywhere we are, because like you said, it's everywhere that we are, like our work, home, play, school, like everything is the environment, and everything we touch is going to have an impact. So how do we have the most amount of positive impact, or at least the least amount of negative impact on our environment? But we have to be very conscious about how different people are experiencing that in different ways. Thank you. So thanks for really telling that story, you all. So moving on to, it actually, I think dovetails pretty well into this kind of section of barriers and opportunities. That to me was like I felt like that was a clear opportunity to kind of cement, or at least state where how can this board be powerful? How can we use our influence? How can we use some means of communication to express things that we're all experiencing or witnessing happening in our community? So as barriers and opportunities arise with this board, first talk just a little bit about capacity, because new boards, again, equal new work, because we are all very, very busy people. So Rusty spoke to this just a little bit, but kind of this being a part of your overall work now and the role as staffer. yeah, how has been for you taking on this role?
Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I think a big part of my role overall at the city is thinking about. I actually do work directly on programs and the development of policies, but a piece of it is also thinking about how and in what ways can we build the city's capacity to better tackle the climate crisis. And I would say before the board's creation, I thought about that mostly in terms of like adding city staff, like adding people who are actually paid to do more work tackling the climate crisis. And we very much still need to do that. But the creation of the board is I would say another and probably at least as important way in which we've added capacity. Because we're only going to be able to do hard things if people in our community want us to do them, are bought into the ways in which we are proposing to do them, and ultimately can kind of co-create them. I've talked a little bit to the board about this example of a new project that we're getting ready to launch, where we did do some fairly deep community engagement in ways that we're pretty proud of. But, and this is around a new network of EV charging stations and a new EV car share system that's going to be operated here by our local nonprofit, Our Car. So anyway, proud of the way in which we engage the community there. But the idea came from us. It came from a combination of city staff working with Our Car and other folks. And then we sort of went out and tested the idea and got some input on it. But really, what excites me about the board is the potential for community members to really be in at the birth of program and policy ideas, and to help co-create them as really being kind of that best model that will actually, in the end, allow us to move faster together. I talked earlier about that issue of urgency and sort of wanting to move fast. But there's an old saying about if you want to move fast, go alone, and if you want to move slow, go move not slow. If you want to go far, go together. Yes. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
I got it wrong there for a second, but and I think there's a ton of truth in that. And so thinking about not just the city's capacity, but the city's capacity to partner more effectively with our community has been a new part of my thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah, Audrey, is this going forward? I think speaking to going far, how do we make sure we kind of move at a healthy pace, like a healthy and effective pace, just so we can all keep our time and our sanity balanced, because there's a lot going on.
Yeah, and that's always the difficult balance of knowing that we are so many people that are doing so many different things, yet we all believe that the work we're doing is important. How do we reconcile those two things? And one of the things that I think is really important is we have made it very open. We have one meeting per month. And what we do is, like, outside of that, there are many opportunities to interact with people. We always are like emailing each other. We're always in communication with each other. And I think that's what's been really helpful. It's been sort of this idea that there's always people that are going to have the capacity at a given moment to sort of push forward and to keep moving. And maybe I'm not sure on the number, I don't want to get it wrong. Maybe not all of us have capacity during an entire month. We only have capacity during this one meeting slot. But because we are all so invested in this project, because we're all so sort of centered and focused on this idea of ensuring a better future for St. Paul, this idea of ensuring we have better climate justice initiatives in St. Paul, throughout the entire month, we still have people that are in and out, people that have capacity. And I think that's been really important. And I think that's really allowed us to sort of, in a sense, keep going throughout these long stretches where we don't see each other, and keep developing. And especially as we're building, as we're going. Having month breaks is really hard, and being able to sort of see that progress between meetings, see sort of that construction of the structure, the ideas. I think that's all that worked in a really nice manner.
Awesome, thank you. I know we should move on to questions here in a moment. I just wanted to see if I can drop in the chat just a little link to the board that's list our kind of board details that's listed on the city's website. We do meet once a month. It's like the second Thursday of the month or so from I should probably get the Russ. I'm like looking at you like, when do we meet? Maybe it's 6 o'clock, 6 to 8.
Yep,
like
6 to 7:30. Yep.
7:30, and they are open to the public. So if you do want to attend a meeting, let me just drop this in the chat here. At least you can try to get into contact with us so we can make sure that you can join. Because I know there's a question about like a web page that will give like updates and things about our and minutes and agendas. I believe that we have that set up or like coming soon. But here, let me drop this in the chat really quick. And then, so before we move on to our Q&A very quick, just wanted to do kind of a quick wrap up of like, what will success look like for our board? What are things that you all are hoping that we can, as we move forward, what would success look like after a year and after our terms? Where are we hoping that, where will we be? What does success look like for the CJAB? Oh, thank you, Russ, for dropping that.
Sure.
Oh, Russ, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Sorry. I mean, I think success is going to look like having built stronger relationships among board members and a common understanding of kind of current conditions, current programs, current policies, and therefore an understanding of where some of the gaps are. And also somewhat of a game plan about how the board can be a part of this idea about broader community engagement, how we can sort of use you all as that, as I mentioned, kind of first line of engagement, but also coming up with ideas about how to more deeply engage with community members, whether through community-based organizations or public forum or whatever the case may be around different topics. All those things take time. And it's that whole thing about sort of moving slow and moving fast. Mm-hmm. But I think success will look like the board feeling truly engaged in the work for me, and adding value to the city's work, which I would say you've already done. So I feel like we're already most of the way there.
Audrey.
Yeah, anyone who knows me really well knows that I'm very big on what are the tangible, tactile impacts of what we're doing. What are the results? And so for me, success is really going through and saying, here's exactly where we transformed, here's exactly where we changed, here's exactly where we impacted city policy, whether it be in a really small way, whether it be in a really big way. Here's where we really accomplished our goal of ensuring that the city is focusing on climate justice, and here's the results, here are the impacts. I think answering that question, especially when it comes to the climate crisis, is hard because we all want to say our end goal, success is there is no more climate crisis. But I think looking deeper and saying that we're in this role, we're in this position, we've been given these privileges by the mayor and by the city. We have the people, and we've talked about sort of getting the right group together that represents the city, that knows how to sort of create change in many different ways. And sort of knowing that we have the power, we have the position, we have the people that are able to sort of impact city policy, and going from there and saying, well, then success is impacting city policy, and let's see what we can do in the next 5 years. In the end, what are our results? And for me, that's what true success will be.
Yes, I love that. We have the people and we have the power to make change and to impact policies and to impact all of our lives in ways that we all need. Because I mean, the climate crisis, it's here. It's kind of here to stay. I think we have to figure out how we're going to live with it, and to I mean, that mitigation and adaptation is really important, but it's like, what does our future hold, and how are we making sure that we're imagining a future that's livable? So I'm a little more like visionary, I guess, but I think that's what I would name as success. All right, so before we move on to Q&A, I I think my colleague's going to throw up on the screen here. Thank you, Russ and Audrey, for talking through so much of our reflections about this first 6 months of being on this board. I really appreciate you both. Quick housekeepings. We will have part 4 of this webinar series that Fresh Energy has been hosting, the intersections of energy and community, next Thursday at noon. So my colleague, the amazing Margaret Cherney-Hendrick, will be moderating a discussion with Margaret Garcia, Associate Director of Elevate, and Keith Kinch, co-founder and general manager of Black Power. And they will be discussing electricity instead of gas. So that's a way to talk about this transition of moving away from natural gas. And then we're on subject of events. Fresh Energy's next big event, our biggest one we do every year, is our benefit breakfast. Of course, it'll be virtual again this year due to the pandemic, but that's okay. It's still a great time. So our benefit breakfast is October 14th. Registration is open right now. And we will be featuring the award-winning climate tech entrepreneur, Donnell Baird, CEO of Brooklyn-based Black Power, an organization proving that businesses can tackle carbon pollution while making a profit and creating family-supporting jobs. So you can register at freshenergy.org/benefit breakfast, and hope you all join us then. And join us again next week. Okay, to the Q&A. There's lots of good questions in here in the Q&A. Yeah, this is just kind of like administrative one. I know, like I mentioned, there's we meet monthly, but and I tried to drop the link in the chat about where to find more details about the board. But do we have a web? I don't know if we have like a city-sponsored webpage that shows our agendas and minutes yet.
We don't. Carlos is actually working on that. So apologies to those who are asking these questions and trying to find us and haven't found much success yet, but we are working on that. And in the meantime, I will post my email address, reach out to me, and we can make sure that you get access to meetings if you want to attend. And those minutes and agendas will be posted soon.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you for taking care of that one. One of the questions we got that was submitted to us prior to the event is from Anjali. So how do we build knowledge and capacity in a community to co-create a vision and or engage in policy that is either wonky or may not be that pressing of a priority? So it's kind of like, how do we build up this maybe collective knowledge and capacity for our entire community that, you know, there's a lot of people who don't even know what kind of policies are being discussed or even what kind of problems even exist because they're just out there living their lives and, you know, trying to get through to day to day. It's a very real thing. So how do we kind of build this collective capacity and knowledge around these issues in our communities? I don't know if either one of you want to tackle that first.
I can jump in first. For me, that's really important because especially as a youth organizer, that's the number one thing we focus on is how do you get youth educated and aware on the issues that are impacting them? And I think that's the most important. And I can speak to how sort of there's been models of saying, like, how do we do it in the classroom? And then maybe Russ more to talking about not young people. But in those spaces, I think one of the things we really focus on is number one, policy. How do we ensure that our policies uplift the correct things, are uplifting the correct curriculum, are supporting the right students, are supporting the right teachers? That's really important. And then also understanding the idea of youth power and sort of ensuring that we have young people that are also teaching young people and understanding that oftentimes the best way to educate young people is through their peers, because we know each other the best, we know how to get through to each other. And oftentimes adults don't really have the same capacity and understanding of how information spreads inside high school spaces or inside youth spaces. And in that vein, those are two of the things that we do a lot of work on is like, when we reach out to youth, we really want youth to be doing outreach. And also we need to make sure we center the right things in our policy, especially when it comes to education, when it comes to curriculum. Those are really important things.
Yes, peer-to-peer teaching, mentoring makes a lot of sense. Russ, if you'd like to respond or?
Yeah, well, I feel like, you know, the climate crisis is sort of everywhere in the world right now. If you're, you know, if you ever turn on the news or listen or read the paper, etc. So I think whereas a few years ago, maybe we had more of a challenge of convincing people of the existence of the crisis. Now, I think the large majority, even of the country, but certainly of St. Paul, are really convinced and know that it's a challenge. In fact, people are rating it as one of their top concerns these days in national polls. So I do think it is really more about the conversation about the what can we do and the how, and it's probably the most common question I get from community members, like what can I do? And part of the answer I think is frustrating because there is only so much we can do as individuals. And a lot of what needs to be done is really at that sort of level of policy and systems. But as individuals, we can all get engaged in those policies and systems, which is what you all are doing as CJAB members, which I think is critical. But I also think that within just sort of city governance, we tend to sort of just put our heads down and try to get the work done and not be really good at communicating and engaging. And I think it's often true that we don't prioritize the communicating and engaging in our budgets because they are great, but not essential for getting the work done. It's sort of been the traditional attitude. And I think maybe those attitudes are starting to change, and you've probably heard it in what I've talked about here. We literally won't be able to get the work done without doing more kind of communicating, engaging, and getting sort of surfacing those best ideas about how to move forward.
Absolutely. And a question in the Q&A from Chelsea is, will the CJEB have input on the American Rescue Plan funds, how they may be allocated? And I mean, that's something that I am definitely curious and interested in of, how we can, so the American Rescue Plan funds are federal funds, and, so how they might come down through to St. Paul. Yeah, I would love to. We haven't yet, Chelsea, I'll say that, but I would think that's absolutely something that CJAB is well in within our kind of purview and within our scope to look at those funds, especially in the ways that they're going to be distributed for climate resilience and action. Audrey, would you like to look at those funds too?
I think that's definitely something that's interesting. I wonder how sort of we can think about funding in a real sense, because that's a much more tangible thing than a lot of things that we've sort of been discussing lately, and saying if we were to receive this thing, what would be our priority and how we think we can sort of influence people and influence our communities the most using that money. It would be interesting. I also think it'd be another step forward in sort of establishing ourselves as saying, and especially within the city, if we're given money, if we're given sort of the ability to control an aspect of funding, that's really important. And that's on your way to becoming a big power player when it comes to how decisions are made.
100%.
Yeah, the American Rescue Plan is sort of a once in a generation type of thing for city government in terms of figuring out the best approach to spending a fairly sizable pot of federal dollars that are arriving, combination of this year and next year, and can be spent over a few year period of time as opposed to needing to all be spent right away, which was the case with the CARES Act last year. So it gives us a little bit more time to think about the most effective uses for those funds. There are some limitations. For the most part, they can't be spent on infrastructure, which of course is a lot of where ultimately our climate work is going to be. But they can be spent to support households that were impacted by COVID economically or health-wise. And so we're doing some thinking, and I've mentioned to the CJAB, but really hasn't been a deep engagement yet around this idea of, can we use that hook within the ARP to potentially invest in some of the homes of our lowest income residents with weatherization and some home repairs, so that we can reduce the energy cost burden on some of the folks who can least afford to pay at the same time that we are reducing emissions. And that would be sort of a sweet spot I think,
Mm,
for
yeah.
our work, if we can figure out a way to do that. And so I'll be bringing some thoughts and ideas to CJAB about that in the very near future.
Yes. And I know we're really close to time, but I wanted to kind of try to combine these questions in the chat here and Q&A from Jean and Christina about working with other community organizations and other potential similar boards and committees that may exist in other Minnesota cities and counties. So Jean says that they live in Dakota County, and would the St. Paul board collaborate with other community boards? And I would say yes, like would love to. Again, we are still so new that and this is kind of part of like, what does community engagement look like going forward? I think definitely collaborating with other commissions and boards that exist, and certainly organizations. I mean, again, this board kind of the idea of it came from a collaboration of environmental justice advocates who some represent organizations, some who don't, but really we're just people. We're all just like people who live in the city and said that this is something that we need, and this would be a good way to have a collective arm for community engagement. So definitely the hope is there. I think the aspiration is there to collaborate with other committees and organizations. Russ and Audrey, I want to give you the last word before we sign off here. There's anything you'd like to respond to that?
Well, it's just been great working with the two of you, with the rest of the board members. I think it really is probably the most exciting piece of my work right now, because honestly, it's I think CJAB is helping to make me personally hopeful about our ability to do this work together. And as I said before, like I think it's a sign that we are moving in a positive direction. We have a lot more work to do as a city to do this work well and effectively, and to get to that place where we really are sort of co-creating things with our community. But that concept is something that Mayor Carter has really infused throughout his administration in terms of an approach. It's been a lot of community process on a lot of different topics before new policy proposals are brought forward. And so it's CJAB is a really important part of that, and looking forward to seeing what we can do, and to Audrey's point earlier, seeing what seeing where we have measured up over the next few years.
Yes, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I know we're running a little time now. So on behalf of everyone here at Fresh Energy, thank you for attending part 3 of our intersection of energy and community webinar series. Thank you, Russ and Audrey. You're both amazing, and I'm so grateful to work with you on this and on many other things. So thank you for your commitments to the city of St. Paul and to climate justice. Truly, thank you all for joining us. A recording of this webinar will be posted at Fresh Energy's website, fresh-energy.org/publications, and on our podcast, because we have a podcast. I hope you all subscribe to it. It's called Decarbonize, the Clean Energy Podcast. And it's available on all the podcasting apps. So you can learn more about Fresh Energy's work at our website, and how you can subscribe to our newsletter, check out our latest blogs, and make a donation. Thank you. We are a nonprofit. So thank you. My email is there. Please reach out about this and all things energy related. And thank you all, and have a really wonderful Thursday. Take care.
Thanks, Janice.
Thank you for tuning in to the audio recording of our webinar. If you're hungry for more or want to get involved, visit fresh-energy.org. And as Janice mentioned during the webinar, we've announced the keynote speaker for our 2021 virtual benefit breakfast that we are calling Future Focus, the New Climate Economy. The breakfast will take place on October 14th, and we are so pleased to welcome award-winning climate tech entrepreneur Donnell Baird, CEO of Brooklyn-based Block Power. You can register and join us at fresh-energy.org/benefit breakfast. And in case you didn't know this, when you register, you can join Fresh Energy staff or board member at their virtual table. Just click the drop down at the bottom of the registration page and click who you want to sit with virtually. I'm on there too, but no pressure. Sit with anyone you like. And finally, you can support Fresh Energy's work by making a donation today. Visit our website at fresh-energy.org and click Donate in the upper right corner. Thank you for listening.